Okay, so why don't we get started? Yesterday, we learned the principle that's brought down in Siman Daled and Choshen Mishpat, that it's permitted under certain circumstances to take the law into your own hand, provided that you don't violate other laws in the process of doing that. I mean, not like Marvin was telling me, where the people who were trying to get their money back kidnapped and tied up the wife and children. It's not what we're advocating, right? Yeah. But what we are saying, it's good to see you, Shmuel. What we are saying is that,
thank you, Rabbi.
Yeah, if it's just a matter of taking back what's rightfully yours, without even if it requires using force that's permissible, and if using physical force is permissible, then it stands to reason that publicly shaming someone in order to get them to do what's right, to give you back what's rightfully yours, is permissible as well. So now the question becomes, how far do you apply that? So the second shaila that's here is ha'im mutar lefarsem shachen shalom mishalem tashlumei vad bayit. Is it permitted to publicize someone who's in your homeowners association, who's not paying their fair share for the monthly fee of the homeowners association? So, in other words, they call that the vad bayit in Israel. It's basically the condo association. Everyone owns a dira in the building. Everyone's got to pay a monthly fee to support the maintenance of the building. There's a deadbeat, and he's not paying it. Okay, so we may have to take him to court. It's a whole process. Are we allowed to post in the elevator of the building, the following people have not paid their condo association fee? So here's the shaila: Yesh lanu shachen shalom mishalem shum tashlum levad habayit lamrot piniot chazrot v'nishnot. He says there's one fellow in our building who's not paying his vad bayit, despite multiple solicitations to him. Ha'imuter lefarsem beluach hamodaot. Can we put up on the bulletin board? Shahashachin hazeh lo mishalem vad bayit lamrot sheneneh misherutei vad habayit kedei la'olso l'shalem. So are we allowed to publicize that despite the fact that he's benefiting from the services of the building, he's not paying? So this would put pressure on him to hopefully pay. So the tshuva is like this. HaGemara omeret b'masechet ktubot she'adam tzarich lazun lefarnes et banav haktanim kemo she'amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Chanina b'usha hiskinu sheyehi adam zanes banav ves benosav k'sheim ktanim. So we saw this Gemara yesterday that Rav Sharaga brought us, which is that a person is obligated, rabbis instituted. It's not a biblical obligation, but it's a rabbinic obligation that as long as your children are minors, they are considered your dependents, and you still have to feed them and clothe them. And this was instituted in Usha, the city of Usha, where the Sanhedrin actually was located temporarily. V'hagemara amra shemisha lo hayarotza lefarnes es yiladav v'hayubayim ladin lifnei Rav Yehuda haya omer alav atanin holid v'hitil es parnasas avlados al b'nei hayir. And when a person would fail to do so and would appear before Rav Yehuda, he would pronounce about them, the serpent has given birth and has placed his cubs in the hands of the community. And when someone like that, when a case like that came before Rav Chisda, he would tell the shliach tzibor to stand on the bima or a soapbox and to make a public announcement. Afilu ha'orev shuach zari rotza bevanav u'mefarnes osam. Even the cruel raven sustains its children. But so and so does not wish to take care of his children. Okay? It's clear that you're allowed to publicly shame someone who's doing the wrong thing, even though it was only a takana. It's not like something which you can say this is an absolute mitzvah. V'chol shekain legabe shachein shemechuyev al pidin l'shalem es demei vadbayis kaven shenena mishirutei vadbayis. He says legally, this neighbor is obligated to pay his monthly fee. He's benefiting from the services of the vadbayit of the condo association, and he's not paying. And if he doesn't, he's a gazlan, he's stealing, right? And therefore, you're allowed to publicize his shameful behavior. But this should not be the first resort. Okay, this is not the first method of pressure. But you have to warn him. Tell him, listen, if we don't get a check by such and such a date, we'll have no choice but to put up a sign basically saying that you're a deadbeat. The im becholzo sulo mishalem mutal farsamo beluach hamodaot shel habinyan. And if with all of those efforts he still refuses to pay, so then you're allowed to publicize him on the bulletin board of the condo, of the apartment building. If he has means to live in the apartment. Look, I guess what if he cries, I don't have the money? Yeah, I think that there would have to be some rachmanis involved if a guy gives you a story, right? I think so. But normally that's not right. Yeah, he'll have to go and ask the community for help. He says there are those who wish to bring proof from the Gemara. The Gemara discusses the pasuk in the Torah that when you are a creditor, you're not allowed to go into his house to take the security. You have to wait outside for him to bring the security out to you. Right? It's basically showing dignity to the debtor that even if you're going to take security from him, you can't just barge into his home. You have to let him take it out to you. And that's talking about a representative of the Beis Din. The Gemara says that if you happen to see him outdoors and he has an object of value on him, you're allowed to take it even forcibly. As the Torah says, as long as you're standing outside his house, it's okay. He says, and it would stand to reason that if a guy's a debtor is standing out on the street carrying his briefcase, and a member of Beis Din is out there trying to get the briefcase, and the guy is there, and they start fighting, and they're pulling back and forth, this is going to cause significant embarrassment to the debtor. Kimit asvim sevivo, because there's going to be harbe anoshim. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to be standing around. The gorim bazebu shalalov, it's causing embarrassment to the debtor. And based on the Gemara's understanding of the pasuk, the Torah still permits us to take collateral from him, even though it's going to cause him embarrassment. The imkainhu hadin b'mikra hazeh sha'over al iser gezel shemuta lefarsim al achar hasra kedasu chidin. And therefore, they wish to argue that based on that Gemara, you see that embarrassment in order to be able to get what is rightfully belongs to the other party, in order to do justice, is not a consideration. So that's the argument. Okay, that's the argument. That's, I guess, a secondary argument. And he quotes from the Sefer Chashukei Chemed. And he says, and the Sefer Chashukei Chemed also brings in the footnote another proof. He says the Rambam writes, Shemisha hakorban Pesach shelo nitma, v'hadin hu shetzarech l'sarvo. If a person's korban Pesach had become tameh, and he wants to bring it home to his family, but they tell him you can't because it's tameh, yesh lasos kein lifnei habir b'fnei hakol kedei levaishan ad sheyizaharu bo. There's this issue that sometimes you do embarrass a person for having been negligent with his sacrificial item. So you're supposed to burn the korban Pesach that became tameh in front of everybody, so like in a public area. So to demonstrate that, this person acted negligently. So you see that we're allowed to sometimes embarrass a person in order that he should fulfill the mitzvot, right? There are certain circumstances. Let's say, a common issue. Let's say you have a guy who's laning in shul, okay? And he's not well prepared, and he's making a lot of fumbles. So what do? So on the one hand, you don't want to embarrass the guy. But on the other hand, don't get up and represent the tzibur for Kriyas Torah or for leading the davening if you're not proficient in your reading. And therefore, the counter argument to no, don't embarrass the guy is you have an obligation to lead the congregation and help them fulfill the mitzvah of Kriyas Torah. You shouldn't have gotten up there if you didn't know what you were doing. And maybe this will help you next time realize that you're not qualified for the job. Well, you could say he's embarrassing himself, but we're contributing to his embarrassment. He's going to feel terrible after hearing himself get corrected so many times. So it's always a struggle. That's why we are more sort of lenient with bar mitzvah boys. We give bar mitzvah boys a pass more than we'll give grown-ups as far as corrections, yeah, because it can be traumatizing to a bar mitzvah boy. But if a grown man, like he wants to lead the thing, then he have to know when you're qualified and when you're not qualified, especially when it comes to a communal act like that. Well, it's not that they can't. Some shuls are more machmir, that they won't allow a bar mitzvah boy to do it because they're worried that he won't do it properly. We've made exceptions to the rule. When I get a chance to listen to the boy, yeah. Yeah. So now getting to Paul's issue is in this last paragraph. Amnam kol zedavkim yesh lo kesef eino rotze l'shalem. This halacha that you're allowed to post his name on the bulletin board is only if you know that he has the money and he just doesn't want to pay it. Aval im be'emet matzavo hakalkali dachuk. But if his financial situation is tight, the gamim hu yirtze l'shalem ein be'efsharuto l'shalem, and he wants to pay, but he just doesn't have the money. He lost his job. Ein kol heter levaisho lefarseim et shemo barabim. Then there is absolutely no heter to go ahead and publicize his name and to embarrass him. The gami she'eno zanes banav u'venosav haktanim demot lefarseno barabim zedafkim yeshlo et hayicholet. He says the same thing is true with the person who refuses to support his children, when they're minors. Right? I just want to be clear. There's no halachic obligation to support your adult children. Okay. Even though they may think so, right? Right? There's no moral or halachic obligation to support them. Right. So it used to be that once they were 6, you could kick them out of the house. In Usha, they made a takana that you have to wait until they're older, until they're bar bat mitzvah. Call me in 10 years. Yeah. when you can make some money. You're right. Okay. But anyway, but we wouldn't publicly embarrass someone who can't support his kids because he has no money. But if he doesn't have the wherewithal, he just simply can't pay it, then you should not publicly embarrass him. He says, because not only will he be humiliated, but other horrible things could ensue as a result as well. So you have to be very, very careful. And I think that's, Paul is very well taken. So he says, in the footnote, he says, V'afal pisha b'gemar b'ksuva sham isa v'lo amran ela d'lo amid aval amid kafinan le al korche. He says, the only time you embarrass him is when he doesn't have the means. But if he has the means, you coerce him until he comes up with the money. What does that mean? Sarach lomar de kavanas hagamaru de im yadua lanu shuhu ashir kofen oso vafilu makin oso kemoshe kosov harambam le'inyan tzedakah. He says that's talking about where a person has wealth and he refuses to do the right thing and support his children, or pay whatever communal taxes have to be paid. And the Rambam writes the same thing in Hilchos tzedakah, that if a person is asked by a community to participate in a communal charity and he refuses, we can even coerce him physically. Aval im lo yadu alanu im hu ashir olo rak mevaishim oto. He says, but if we don't know whether he's wealthy or not, and he refuses to disclose anything, he just blows us off, then we're allowed to embarrass him publicly and put his name on the bulletin board. Ulam ba'ofen sheyadu alanu she'en lo kesef klal ein mevaishim oto. It's only when we know that he doesn't have money. So he's got to have in other words, the point being, the guy who gets the bills and just ignores them, so the head of the condo association, the barabayit, has to have a conversation with him. If every time he tries calling the guy hangs up the phone on him, if he knocks on his door, the guy refuses and says, get away from my door, so then you're allowed to post on the bulletin board. If, however, you have a conversation, he's a sweet fellow, but he says, I just lost my job, and I'm wondering if you can let me float for a couple of months until I get back on my feet, and I'll just owe the fees in the future. So then, of course, you can't embarrass him. The nira diyesh l'daya kain miloshen harambam shekasa b'perak yadalit mehilchos ishus b'med dvarim amurim shemachrizin alav barabim, because the Rambam writes this very idea where he says, when are you allowed to publicly humiliate someone? V'isha eno amud, when you don't know that he's wealthy. Ve'en yadua imrei litein tzedakah eno roi, and we don't know whether he's capable of giving charity or not. Aval imaya amud sheyesh lo mamon haroi litein mimenu tzedakah hamaspekes lahen. But if you know that he has wealth, he's driving around town in a Bentley, and he still refuses to participate, so then motziin mimenu bal korcho mishum tzedakah v'zanin osan ad sheyigdalu. Then, and he refuses to support his kids, his minor children, right? Let's say he's a deadbeat, like the husband and wife are divorced, and he's not paying child support. And the wife comes to the Beis Din, and she says, I have no money to feed my kids. Well, what about your husband? He's driving around in a Bentley. So he says, well, we're divorced, and he refuses to pay child support. Okay, now that's a bad thing. But now you have to open up the case a little bit further, right? Because now these are real life cases. This is, unfortunately, ma'asim b'chol yom. What happens if he's refusing to pay child support because he has no access to the children? She refuses to let him see the kids. Right. So you can't just take her side of the story. You have to go back to the husband, find out what's really going on. Like, why are you driving around? Clearly you have the wherewithal to support your children. Why are you not paying your child support? And what does the court have to say about this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the Beis Din can't be too quick to pull the trigger on these things. But when the Beis Din had jurisdiction, and if they verified that indeed the father is refusing to support the children, so then they could actually physically coerce him, like go into his funds, go into his home even, and take away forcibly his assets, like to repossess his car, stuff like that. Right. That's when you're a creditor, right? But when the Beis Din actually does have the authority to actually sometimes go in if it's been made clear the Beis Din has given a court order. So it sounds like from the Rambam's language that if you know for a fact that he doesn't have the means, or he claims he doesn't, it's presumably if he claims he doesn't have the means, then you're not allowed to publicly embarrass him. So this really, there is going to be some gray area here, because what if he keeps claiming, I don't have the money, and yet you see he just took a trip to Morocco, or wherever. Same thing, tuitions. Same thing. Well, listen, remember nowadays, no one has jurisdiction other than the secular courts to forcibly extract money from someone, right? Unless you want to risk facing an assault charge, right, or trespassing, or or petty larceny and stuff like that. So, but what is, this leads to sort of the question: how does a school or any institution that is providing, a charitable institution that's providing religious services, how does it verify the claims of an individual? Well, show us your T4, right? But let's say he's in a cash business, right? So the T4 is not going to show what he's really making. Let's say there's a suspicion that he's making quite a bit of money and he's not paying his tuition. Well, the only recourse that the school has is basically to say to the guy, your kids are out of the school until you pay up. If they've been able to verify that indeed he has the means, they can't really do anything more.
Well, they made the mistake all years to give it the money instead of lending the money interest free.
What's that?
I think they've been making mistakes all these years. Instead of giving the money, they should have been lending the money interest free, so that the guy's still on the hook later on.
You mean when you give someone a scholarship, you should say it's a loan?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what some schools are doing, actually. Yeah, we'll give you a scholarship, but it's not a grant. You owe the school money, and you can pay it out over the next 20 years. Yeah, that's right.
Otherwise, schools go bankrupt, like we've seen.
Yeah. Okay, next. Well, this is really the next. No, we're not gonna be cutthroat about it. Okay. So this is really the next she'elah. Are you allowed to expel a child when the parent have not fulfilled the psak din of the Beis Din? Now, this is not a case where the parents are refusing to pay the tuition. Question is, what do we do when a person has received the psak from Beis Din to do something? Let's say to pay someone that the Beis Din has said you have to pay. That person is in contempt of Beis Din. What kind of social pressure is allowed to be placed on that person? Can we go so far as to expel this person's children from the school, from the local school, in order to pressure him to do the right thing, to comply with the order of the Beis Din? Well, let's see the shaila. Adam shehuzman ledin Torah bifnei Beis Din chashuv shebeir. Man is summoned before the Beis Din. It's called the Beis Din Chashuv, which means it's the established Beis Din that is well known. It's not just like some fly-by-night rabbi who puts his name on stationery, but it is an established Beis Din in the city. He receives a summons. The Chasam al Shtar Borurus Kedin, Umimayin Lakayim es Psak Hadin. He's already gone to the Beis Din. He's signed off his what's called the Shtar Berurin, which is where you agree to comply with the binding arbitration of the Beis Din. He then goes and loses the case, and now refuses to fulfill the Psak Din of the Beis Din. The Kasvul of Beis Hadin Ksav Seruv. Now the Beis Din has had to issue what's called a Seruv, a writ of Seruv. Now, what is a writ of Seruv? It basically says this man has refused to comply with the ruling of the Beis Din. This could happen, let's say, if the Beis Din has ordered him to give his wife a get and he refuses. It could happen, and that's probably the most common situation. Another situation could be where this man has been ordered by Beis Din to pay out a certain sum, and he's refused to comply, right? Well, can one of the means of social pressure be to expel the children from school until he fulfills the ruling of the Beis Din? Like, how far can a community go in order to apply social pressure on one of the members of its community to comply with the ruling of the Beis Din? So, Doug, you're like sort of, your eyes are popping out because you're saying to yourself, this would never go in New Zealand, right? Yeah, the children are gonna end up suffering, right? It's horrible for the children. But so Doug is not really happy with this idea. Is there a counter argument? Anyone want to offer a counter argument? Okay. Adam shalom mekayim psak din, o hamisariv ledin bedin Torah, dino mivuar b'shulchan aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch deals with the Masariv Ledin, with a person who's in contempt of the court's ruling. Keitzad mezamnin baldin ladun Torah, sholchem lo hazmana al yedei shaliach beis din sheyovo biyom ploni ledin. So how do we summon a person to court? We send him a letter via proxy that he should appear before beis din on such and such a date. Lo ba. If he fails to appear, we send him a second summons. Lo ba mazminim oto pam shlishi. If he fails to appear the second time, we send him a third summons. Lo ba mantinin lo kol hayom. If he doesn't show, then we wait the entire day, lest perhaps he got delayed. And as we give him plenty of chances. Lo ba minadin oto lemachrato. But if by the end of the day he doesn't show up, and the following day we place him under a ban. So Ela imkain yitain hezber hamiyashevet hadat madua lo hofia, unless he's able to provide a legitimate excuse as to why he was unable to appear. V'chol zeh lemi she'eino ba'ir, but that's only when the person is out of the city. And therefore, the only recourse is to basically place him under a ban. Avol mishe ba'ir osim lo rak hazmana echat v'im lo ba minadin oto l'machrato. And if he doesn't show up, and he has the ability to show up before Beis Din, then we put him under a ban immediately after failing to appear even the first time. Now, the cause of hatumim. But Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz writes, "Sha'achshav nagu shafilu mishabayir echad anoshim ve'echad noshim mazminim otam shalosh pe'amim v'im lo ba minadin oto v'chein katav b'netivot hamishpat." These later day poskim in other words, later than the Shulchan Aruch, they paskin that even a person who lives in the city should be summoned a full 3 times before placing him under a ban. Okay, so, and that's the reason why we're more familiar with this idea of getting summoned 3 times, because even though the Shulchan Aruch says that if he lives in the city, he doesn't get more than 1 opportunity to show up, or at least explain his absence. But Lamaisa Bizman Hazeh, we treat everyone as if they're from out of town. Uvishulchan Aruch nifsak din haminudeh. So what does it mean to be under a ban? Right. So the Shulchan Aruch discusses what it means to be under a ban. So the cost of Sham HaRama, the Rama explains Yesh Rishus Lebeisdin Lahachmir Alav Shalo Yamulu Espino Velo Yikaver Im Yamus Ulagaresh Espanav Mi Beit HaSefer Ve'et Ishto Mi Beit HaKnesset Ad Sheyikabel Alav Et Adin. That the Beis Din has the authority to refuse to circumcise his child, to refuse to bury him in the cemetery when he dies, to expel his children out of school, and to expel his wife out of the women's section in shul until he accepts judgment upon himself. Those were the good old days. when goyals were goyals and men were men, right? Remember that line? Okay, so anyway, let's continue this halacha tomorrow.
Thanks.